Hello everyone, and welcome to a brand new Imperator Rome Let's Play. This time we're diving into the heart of the Roman Republic itself, starting as Rome in 304 BCE, using the Invictus mod along with several submods that enhance the overall experience. You can find the full list of mods in the video description below. This campaign was chosen by you, the viewers, in a recent poll where 44% of you voted to see Rome's rise to power. So here we are, stepping into the sandals of the Senate and people of Rome, guiding the fledgling republic towards its destiny as the dominant force in Italy and eventually the entire Mediterranean, and maybe even more. But before we get into the details of our starting position, let's take a moment to reflect on how Rome got here. Rome's origins are deeply intertwined with legend, myth, and historical reality. According to tradition, the city was founded in 753 BCE by Romulus, the legendary first king, after he and his twin brother Remus were raised by a she-wolf. The tale is almost certainly a myth, but archaeological evidence suggests that Rome indeed grew from a small settlement along the banks of the Tiber River in the mid-8th century BCE. Its location was crucial, sitting at a natural crossing of the Tiber and surrounded by 7 hills. Rome was well positioned for defense, expansion, and growth as it was founded on one of the major trade routes running across Italy. For its first 2.5 centuries, Rome was a monarchy ruled by a succession of 7 mythical kings. Early Rome was heavily influenced by the Etruscans, a powerful civilization to the north, and likely adopted many of their religious, architectural, and military traditions. During this period, Rome was still a relatively minor power compared to its neighbors, but it was already expanding its reach, establishing fortifications, roads, and early institutions that would define its later success. The last of these kings was Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, a tyrannical ruler whose arrogance and oppression led to his downfall. In 509 BCE, after the infamous rape of Lucretia, a noblewoman assaulted by the king's very son, causing a public uprising, Rome's aristocrats, led by Lucius Junius Brutus, overthrew the monarchy and established the Roman Republic, swearing to never have a king again. This moment marked the birth of a new political system, where power was distributed between elected officials rather than resting in the hands of a single ruler. It is worth noting that the aversion for kings cost many their lives when they were suspected or even tried for the crime of trying to become an autocrat or generally just trying to gain too much power. It is important to say that Rome's transition to a republic was far from smooth. During this period, the conflict between the patricians, which was the noble elite of Rome, and the plebeians, which were the common citizens, dominated Roman politics and brought several periods of instability. The struggle of the orders saw plebeians fight for and gradually gain political rights, including representation in the government through the tribunes of the plebs, and later even the sought-out office of the consul himself. Furthermore, the city was surrounded by hostile neighbors, including the Etruscans, Sabines, Volsci, and Equi, all of whom sought to exploit Rome's political instability. One of Rome's first major victories came in the Latin Wars, a series of never-ending conflicts with hostile tribes of Italy. The Battle of Lake Regillus, which took place circa in the 496 BCE, a legendary fight against the Latin League, reinforced Romans' dominance in the region. However, Rome soon faced a much greater challenge, one that nearly destroyed it. In 390 BCE, a disaster struck that would haunt Roman memory for centuries. A group of Senones, a Gallic tribe from the north, swept down into Italy and clashed with Rome at the Battle of the Apulia River. The Roman forces, caught off guard and overwhelmed, were utterly routed. It is important to note that in this period, Rome's territory was barely more than one of a city-state, and such a defeat meant utter devastation, as nothing stood between the invading army and the city itself. The Gauls then marched into Rome, pillaged the city, and burned much of it to the ground. The surviving Romans took refuge in the fort in the middle of the city, where they famously endured a long siege. According to legend, Rome was only saved when the city's leader, exiled at the time, Marcus Furius Camillus, returned with an army and drove the Gauls out. Though historical accounts suggest that the Romans may have paid a heavy ransom in gold to secure their departure and never got their revenge on the plundering army. It is also worth noting that the devastation of the city was so absolute that we lost all of the written accounts, and thus the history of Rome until now is mostly coming from oral tradition, history of other nations, and later revisions by the Roman historians. It is also worth noting that the devastation of the city was so absolute that we lost all of the written accounts, and thus the history of Rome to this point is mostly coming from oral tradition, history of other nations, and later revisions by Roman historians. The event of sacking of Rome shook Romans to their core. It exposed the city's vulnerabilities and left an everlasting scar on its people, so much so that the Romans considered abandoning the city completely and moving to one of the other locations available to them. But instead of breaking, Rome rebuilt to become stronger than ever. In the aftermath, the Romans fortified their city walls, reorganized their military, and vowed to never let such a disaster happen again, which they managed to uphold for 800 years until the 410 sack of Rome by Visigoths. The lesson learned from the Gallic sack shaped Rome's future expansion. Conquering was no longer just about power, it was about security. No longer would Rome be content with being a city-state that controls the cities around it using loose alliances. It needed more. With its internal struggles stabilized and its defenses secured, Rome turned its attention to the new enemy, the Samnites. The Samnites were a formidable tribal confederation from the rugged Apennine Mountains. Fierce warriors with a strong warrior culture, they controlled much of central Italy and posed a major threat to Rome's ambitions. The First Samnite War, taking place from 343 to 341 BCE, was a short-lived conflict that ended with a fragile peace. However, tensions remained high, and Rome soon found itself embroiled in a much larger struggle, the Latin War, 340 to 338 BCE. The Latin League, once Rome's allies, rebelled against its growing dominance, seeing Rome's weakness from the Samnite War. After several hard-fought battles, Rome crushed the Latin League and dissolved it, bringing many of its former allies under direct Roman control. The Second Samnite War, 326 to 304 BCE, was a defining conflict in Rome's history. Initially, Rome suffered one of its worst defeats at the Battle of the Caudine Forks that took place in 321 BCE, where the Samnites ambushed and humiliated an entire Roman army, forcing them to surrender. However, the Romans, ever resilient, regrouped and adapted their tactics, abandoning their traditional phalanx formations in favor of the manipular system, which allowed for greater flexibility in battle. The main reason for this change was the fact that the war was now fought in a rougher terrain, one where the Samnites had no issue to outflank or encircle the traditional phalanx, which was a sure way to destroy it. By the year 304 BCE, Rome had finally gained the upper hand, and peace was concluded. The Samnites had been severely weakened, though they were not yet fully defeated. Rome had also begun integrating defeated cities into its growing network of allies, establishing colonies to secure its control over central Italy. And that brings us to our starting date, 304 BCE, right at the end of the Second Samnite War. Rome has spent the last 2 decades battling the Samnites, one of the most formidable tribal peoples of central Italy. Through sheer resilience, battlefield tactics, and network of loyal Latin allies, Rome has managed to push the Samnites back, but their defeat is not yet absolute and will have to be resolved in the coming years. Rome now stands on the precipice of a true dominance over central Italy, but our position remains precarious. While we are stronger than ever, new dangers lurk on the horizon. The Samnites may be weakened, but they are not yet crushed, and should they find allies in the Etruscans, Umbrians, or even the Gauls, we would find ourselves outmatched. It will require careful diplomacy to ensure that this scenario never happens. Thus, ahead of us lies the Third Samnite War, the looming threat of Etruria, and the ever-present risk of another Gallic invasion. Our path is clear. We must crush our rivals, secure our borders, and ensure that Rome's rise to power is unstoppable. With that, let's jump into the game, examine our starting position, and cover the mechanics and steps we'll take as we guide Rome towards its rightful place as the master of Italy and beyond. For the glory of Rome, let's begin! Welcome to the game. So as this is the first episode in my very first Let's Play of Imperator Rome, as you can probably guess, I will spend the rest of the video explaining what the hell is going on here, so that you guys can follow it. And boy, there is a lot to explain. If you already know the game or are not interested in detailed description, please feel free to skip to next episode where we will start playing the game properly. But I suggest you still breeze through this one, as I will be explaining mechanics and how we will use them in the coming decades to benefit our growing empire. So there will be a bit of a strategy talk as well. I will try to split my explanations into coherent chapters so that it's easy to navigate based on the timeline notes. But if anything doesn't make sense or is unclear while I'm explaining, no worries, we'll probably circle back to it in the upcoming chapter. And even if we don't circle back to it, feel free to ask me in the comments. I will be happy to answer you in a one-on-one conversation. So, we're starting the game with a pop-up here, which is telling us about the Senatus Populisque Romanus. For over 20 years, the nascent Roman Republic has fought a harsh campaign against the Samnite people to the south. Although victory often seemed far from grasp, the war ended in Rome's favor, resulting in the liberation of the important Greek city of Neapolis. The Samnites, however, having retreated to lick their wounds, are far from defeated. In the north, the Etruscan people eyed the expansion of the Republic with apprehension. To the south, myriad Greek city-states plot behind one another's back, all the while appealing to their benefactors in Greece for aid. On the far-flung island of Sicily, the foreign invasion of the mysterious Carthaginian Empire threatens to upset the precarious balance of power in the region. Will Rome rise victorious, or fall to internal strife and barbaric hordes? The fate of the Republic rests in your hands. For the Republic. So we're starting with a truce with Samnium until the 1st of November 1453, and with Etruria until the 1st of June 455. Now the dates here are based on a different calendar. It is counted from the founding of Rome, so that would be probably the way the Romans would count it in their time. I actually don't know much about the Roman calendar, to be honest. I might want to check that down the line. When it comes to the actual hour calendar, it is the 1st of October 304 BCE. So yes, we are starting right after the Second Samnite War. You can see here some of the characters that we will be talking about. We have our consul Publius, our co-consul Publius, okay, they're both Publiuses, and we have a guy representing here Samnium, Etruria, and Carthage. So, how to start? Well, if we look at the map, we can see that it is actually really big. I have not covered that, really, but it covers everything from the British Isles and southern Scandinavia to what is today's Morocco, down all the way to Arabia and the Horn of Africa, and it ends on the other side past India, just shy of Laos and Vietnam. There are some provinces even in here, but as far as I know, the map should be expanded in future versions of the Invictus mod. So we're gonna see. This is as far as we go. Historically, of course, Rome never really got that far. It reached out towards Armenia, the Seleucids, and down through the Ptolemaic kingdom towards Kush, but never really much further than that. In what is today's Russia and Ukraine, and they got the Bosporan kingdom as a client state, and they got slightly further, and they never, of course, gotten anywhere close to Scandinavia. They got parts of British Isles, but they ended in about this area. They never really settled in the region of Bohemia, basically further than what is today's Austria. That was where it ended. Now, we have a number of map modes here. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that as we are going to go through the game. Let me just start with the interface here. So what you can see here on the left is the menu where we have various things like the government, economy, religion, trade, military, mercenaries, and many more. Up here, as is usual in the Paradox games, you have your notifications or things that require your attention. And above here, we have the major stats for our Roman Republic. So we have the gold with an income. It shows you here how much we get from taxes, commerce, and how much we're paying in fleet maintenance, fort maintenance, and wages. Again, we'll be discussing these a little bit more. Here's our manpower and how much we're getting every month. Here's our political influence, what we're getting it from, and what is our maximum, which is 500. By the way, it's an interesting thing because it lies. It tells you that the political influence can be between 0 and 500, but in many cases we're going to drop way below 0. So I'm not sure what that 0 here means, really. If we have our military experience, which you can turn into military traditions, and it also, if you don't use it, it gives you bonuses to the performance of your armies. Here's our stability, which is not unlike the stability in, for example, EU4, but the stability is always trying to find its level. In most cases, it is at 50, if it's not modified, but for us, we're actually going slightly above. If you go too high, the stability is going to start dropping. If you go too little, if you go too low, it will have much more pressure to rise on its own. Various events change your stability, and various decisions that you take change your stability. If you have aggressive expansion, the more aggressive you are, the more penalties you will get to relations and many other places, or to relations and in many other places you will see penalties. War exhaustion, this one never really was much of a problem for me, but the longer you fight and the more casualties you take, the higher the war exhaustion is. There's tyranny, when we're going to do various stuff that people won't like, or the Senate won't like, because again, we're a republic, tyranny is going to increase. And here's the support in the Senate, which is actually kind of important. I'm going to speak about in the part about politics. Now, when we look at the national overview, you will see that we are an aristocratic republic, which is historically accurate. Our capital is Rome. We have, where can we see that here? I guess we can't. We have a Roman heritage, which gives us a little bit of bonuses to monthly military experience and manpower recovery speed, but our navies aren't all that good. We have another view that we can look at, which is a diplomatic view. We have an italic culture group. We are italic is the religion. That's our religion. It always confuses me a little bit because we're gonna soon switch to Hellenic, and we have a Roman culture. We have 457 in pop, which is actually a pretty decent starting population. The starting population defines quite a lot about the difficulty of the game, so we're starting really well off. We have 23 territories, we have a treasury of 208 gold, manpower we already discussed, stability we discussed. Our leader is the consul Publius Sempronius Sophus. I'm going to be talking about him a little bit more, but not right now. We're gonna circle back to him when we speak about characters. Now, the thing that I actually want to start with is our population and the cultures. This is most probably the defining and most important thing for every game of Imperator Rome, your population, because that one defines everything. It defines everything that you will do and that you will gain, and if you lose a war and lose population, it will severely weaken you. So how does this work? Well, it's a little bit more complicated. We have a number of different castes. There's actually 5 castes in the game. The pops aren't actual representation of people. They're more of a hypothetical modular units, so you cannot think of that like we have 457,000 people. It's just a vague number showing you where your people live. You have nobles, you have citizens, you have freemen, you have tribesmen, which we will try to get rid of because they're mostly useful for, you guessed it, tribes, and we have slaves. Each one of these actually gives you a certain amount of production, each giving you something different, and these various pops that you have actually have their own defining characteristics. So when we look at the nobles, you can see that we have 8 Italic Roman nobles, but we have 2 Hellenic Romans. We have 1 Italic Etruscan, 1 Hellenic Italiotian, and 1 Hellenic Etruscan. So you can see that they have their own culture and they have their own religion. When we look at citizens, you can see that it gets a little bit more extensive. Same with the freemen. There you have tribesmen and slaves. Now, the cultures of your people are actually super important. When we sort our culture based on the number of population, you can see that our biggest group is the Roman culture. It is our primary culture, and it is currently the only integrated culture, meaning that there are the only people who can actually become citizens and nobles. Everybody else, like the Etruscans, the Mesampians, the Italiotians, the Sabellians, and the Hebrews can become only freemen. So they're either slaves, tribesmen, or freemen. Only Romans can become citizens and nobles. Now there's a way you can play with these. You can grant certain boons to your secondary cultures, or you can integrate them and basically recognizing them as your own culture, or putting them at the same level, which we are not going to do. Romans historically were very friendly towards nations or civilizations around them that bowed to Rome. If you bowed to Rome, you were offered full citizenship, you were assimilated, and you gained quite a lot. Or you were left alone to your own devices as a client state. That was also a possibility. Those that resisted were pushed down. Usually their leadership was executed, but the population itself weren't usually, I'm going to stress that usually there were some atrocities, of course, committed by the Romans, but usually they were absorbed into the Roman Empire. And that's what we're going to do here. We're never going to integrate other cultures. We're just going to sometimes give them certain rights. That's because the culture happiness is the base thing that we will deal with, and the lower it is, the more unrest and less production you get from these pops. However, as I mentioned, the population actually assimilates, which we will look at right now, into your primary culture, and thus, if you are smart about it, you can basically turn all of them into Romans, making yourself much stronger, which is really important because your primary pops, as I said, give you quite a thing. Let's start by looking at Rome, so I can explain a little bit more about the population and you will understand why it is so important. So Rome has full population right now. It has 61 out of 61 population. It has 5 nobles, 26 citizens, it has 22 freemen, it has 4 tribesmen, and it has slaves. Just 4 slaves. You can always see what the desired amount is, so we would really like to have more nobles here, we have way too many citizens, and we have way too many tribesmen. The desired amount is 0, but we would like more slaves as well. We're pretty good with freemen. The population always has... the population in the game is very dynamic. Let's use the name dynamic. We have people actually assimilating, so there is a 0.86% per month assimilation going on, and in June 460, so in about 10 years, an Italic Etruscan citizen will become Roman. You can boost these or you can decrease these using various modifiers and buildings. There is people who are converting into Italic faith. It's going actually much faster. So the Israelite Hebrew citizens here will become Italic. We have people actually promoting. So an Italic Roman citizen, because we have way too many here, will be promoted into a noble. And we have an Israelite Hebrew citizen, which will be demoted into a freeman. So, you know, there's promotions, demotions, there's assimilation both for religion and for culture. And there's also growth. In February 490, Roman tribesmen following the Hellenic faith will have grown, which is really weird while we're growing a tribesman here, when there's no desire for that. Maybe it's gonna change and it's just a setup, but you basically get a pop from time to time. Now these statistics are actually set for every single province that we have, so you get these assimilations, growths, promotions everywhere, plus people move around. You have various emigration, actually you can see that here, but in Ostia we can actually see that people are migrating into the city. They're not migrating into Rome right now because it's full, pretty much. We can increase this based on civilization, but I'm going to speak about it a little bit later. Now, I'm planning to play really tall, so we're going to play with our population quite a lot and focus on it because that's fun. And I want to make it work. We're gonna, in the beginning, focus on Rome, of course, because it's our capital. And I'm gonna also focus on Ostia and Veii. Ostia was actually called Ostia Antica, and it was the Roman biggest port. So we're gonna try to do that here. We're gonna build, there's a number of buildings here you can do. We have a port already at level 2 here, so we're gonna improve that so that it serves Rome as its major port. And there's a city of Veii here, which was previously an Etruscan city. Rome fought for it for quite some time with the Etruscan and conquered in the year 396 BCE. What's kind of important though is that it was one of the locations that the Romans actually considered moving into when Rome was sacked by the Gallic tribes. So it is eventually, I mean, it's only 16 miles from Rome at it's what would you call it? Like, it's on the other side of the Tiber River, and it was only 16 miles away from Rome, so very close. And eventually it became sort of a suburb for Rome, with large villas for the rich in Rome. So it is a really nice place as well for us. So we're gonna be focusing on these cities, but we also have a couple of other cities that we will focus on. Now, I should mention that there is 3 levels that you can have in your provinces. There's settlement, which is basically just a province with some people. For example, in Circe we have 11 pops out of 18. We have 13 here in Norba. We have some in Fregellae, 11 people. Then you have cities, which is Rome, we also have Lavinium and Tibur, and we have Capua here, which was one of the most important cities after Rome, for Rome up until pretty much forever. We also have the port and city of Neapolis here. So we have a lot of cities, and you can also upgrade the city to something called a metropolis, which costs a lot of money and influence, requires you to have a population of 80, but it massively boosts the population capacity and the output of the population. So it is pretty good. Now, each one of these pops also gives you different things. So nobles, they produce most research, citizens provide manpower and a little bit of research, freemen provide tax and manpower, tribesmen provide everything, but for us they are pretty much useless. If you're a civilized nation, you don't want tribesmen, and you have slaves, which provides money. Now, there is also, you can see the happiness here for each of these various classes. We will try to improve that. Again, that is something that you must play a lot with. As you can see, the population is actually really complicated. Now again, you have various buildings here. You can play with those. We're going to talk a little bit more about those later, just so you don't feel that I'm skipping something, but I'm trying to focus on population right now. There is a really nifty thing called ledger. Usually I try to avoid the ledgers in the game because they show you a lot of information about enemies, but for this game it is actually really good. You can sort by population, nobles, you can sort by unrest, you can sort by current civilization level, which influences quite a lot of things, but mostly population capacity. And as you can see, the biggest cities we have is Rome, Veii, and Capua, then Tibur, Ostia, or Ostia Antica, as I might refer to it, then Canusium, Lavinum, Neapolis, and I think these ones are then settlements. Yes, here's where the settlements start. So we're gonna, in our building and enhancement, or whatever you want to call it, in our investments, we're going to always try to start at the top from Rome. You can see that we still have some possible buildings there. We have only 7 out of 11, and we're going to move down from there. I'm going to treat Rome, Veii, and Ostia as one big city eventually, including Tibur and Lavinium as well, because they are, basically suburbs of Rome. But we're going to also invest into Capua and other cities as we take them. We also have a little bit of territory over here, but it is quite far away from us, and we can only reach it through our allies here, not through the Samnium. So, as I mentioned, each population assimilates. There is various ways how they work, they migrate around. It's really cool, and it's something you really want to keep your mind at, because the more you invest in your population and the better you play with it, the better it is. It's fun with tribes. You do it a little bit differently. With the Greeks, for example, you do it a little bit differently. You have, the possibility to integrate some populations, basically making them your core population. But again, as I said, we're never going to do that. We're going to focus on the Roman population itself. Now, the main benefit of the core population is that it gives you people you can raise in your military. Now, at this point, Rome didn't really have a standing army. It had a draft system basically in place, where you took your core population and you split them into various units based on their class. And I don't mean the pop class here, but basically in the ancient time of the class of the people. The rich people, for example, could afford horses, then the poorer could become a heavy infantry, and the weakest one became skirmishers or supporting units like slingers or archers. Now, it is important to say that right now we can raise 34 units, which is 17,000 men, of which 31 times 500, so 15,500 is going to be fighting units, and we will get 3 additional support units, which is the supply trains, which will carry food around. And we are also having some population in Magna Graecia, which is a second region here. And you can see that from there we can only raise 6. That's because we have much less core population in this area. So as we assimilate more and more people into our Roman culture, they will boost our army, and that's gonna make it much better. Alright, so in the previous part we have talked a little bit about the population and how it influences what's going on in the game. And the biggest benefit from your core population, as I mentioned, is that it can be put into an army. Now, again, we have a level system here, so if we want to, at any point we can raise the levies, making them into a standing army that we can send wherever we want into war, or later on we can do things with them, like, for example, build roads, build forts and stuff like that. But again, right now they will mostly serve us for the army. The units that you raise can only come based on your core population, and if we, for example, integrated someone else like the Etruscans, they would boost our main army. Interestingly, each population gives you units based on their core culture. So an Etruscan army would look slightly different. There are also when we look at the culture, you will see that they are also seen as a culture of the Is it the Latin? No, Italic. All right. There's still an Italic culture, so they would be fairly similar, but there might be some slight differences. But if we, for example, played as the Greeks, or if we played as a Gallic nation, or if we played as, I don't know, the Anatolian, we would have a completely different composition. The Punic, for example, would most likely have some camel cavalry, and they might have some elephants, which we will never gain access to. But we can actually benefit from a lot of heavy infantry and heavy spearmen that we have here, and the light infantry. I marked it down in the description that I'm using a special mod that enhances the military and actually gives you a couple new unit types and rewrites the types that are already in the game. So if you don't use that mod, you will see slightly different things. I think, for example, that the Romans in Invictus have heavy cavalry, while we will mostly use light cavalry, which in my opinion is a little bit more historic than having heavy cavalry as Romans, because the Equites were, in my opinion, really more of a light cavalry here. Now, it is important to say that as you expand into other regions, right now, as I said, we are in Italia, is it? Sorry, I can't see it. Yeah, I think it's Italia. Does it show here? It doesn't. Alright, well... Oh wait, it shows here, sorry. As we are in Italia and Magna Graecia, we have two distinctive armies that we can raise from that, but as we're gonna get Gaul, Illyria, Transalpine Gaul, as we're gonna get maybe Africa, Greece, we are going to be able to raise more and more units from each of these, and as we are going to assimilate people into Romans, our armies will grow stronger. But it is not without issues. I'm gonna jump a little bit ahead of myself and raise the levies here just to show you what it looks like when you raise them. There is a number of things that I need to mention. First of all, when you raise your levies, they no longer produce as they did in your cities. Most notably, because we're raising citizens and nobles, we will lose a big chunk of our research. We're also going to have to pay them, even if not very much, but we will have to pay them. And they consume food. Food is a really big thing. We're going to talk about food a little bit later, but basically we just took a huge amount of the province food. And considering it is October, Rome would starve over winter. And that is not something we want to do. When your units run out of food or you move them around, they basically steal it. I mean, they're not stealing it, but they're eating up the food that's in the provinces. So, it's not always a good idea to have them standing like this, because you just, pay them and you have to feed them, and it is not great. So you have to think about when you raise your units. Also, when you disband them, you will see... Wait, can I do it? Yes, you will see that you cannot re-raise them until certain amount of time. So in 4 months we can raise the levy again, but it is important to keep this in mind that there is a cooldown period during which you cannot raise the levy again. So be careful with that. Now it's also worth mentioning, and that doesn't really, it's not really that much of a surprise, but the battles in early and late antiquity were extremely brutal. So no matter who we fight, we are always going to take massive casualties. If it's a one-to-one army fight, it is pretty much given that we are going to lose thousands upon thousands of soldiers. There's no way around it. No matter how good your leader is, how good your army is, what your discipline is, you will always take massive casualties. You're also going to take casualties from attrition, and this is not great, because if your units get too much damage, they can actually inflict damage on your actual core population, and you will lose some of it. So during wars you can see that maybe our Roman population is going to go down because we will literally lose men on the field. Now what comes into play really a lot is the martial stat of each of the leaders. It's important to say that the armies that we are going to raise will always be led by the governors. Your core territory is led by the consul. Again, we're going to speak about him and his role a little bit later. But you saw that when we raised the army here, it was led by Marcus Valerius Corvus, who is actually an extremely good leader. He's a historical person, and he's a marshal of 10. So he is pretty good. Now there are characters that I've seen in the game that have even like 14, giving you massive boost, and this is one of the reasons why I actually don't like Republic that much, because it suffers quite a lot in the department of the consuls, where you can pretty easily get someone with a 0 or something ridiculous like 2 in your core territory. You've had very little chance to influence that, and that means your biggest army, sucks. But as we're gonna be able to appoint the governors in Magna Graecia and in, for example, Cisalpine Gaul, we will be able to appoint good leaders there with a high martial and make sure that they help us. When you unite your armies, you cannot actually split this army and give command to someone else, but if you combine your armies into one big one, the leader with the highest martial will always lead. So there's something about that actually is like a silver lining. But again, as I said, food is really important. If you actually don't take any attrition as long as you have food. So if we keep marching around here, we will never starve. But as we lay siege to enemy cities, we are going to start using food, and when we run out, attrition will take hold. Now we're going to replenish our units from the manpower pool, but it affects negatively your entire army if you run out of food. So it's pretty important, and I love that actually, that there's a lot of strategy going into keeping your units supplied. And again, you need to think about where you're raising your units from, because right now Rome would pretty much starve through the winter, and a lot of our population would die. It's actually kind of interesting, a historical side note, but for a long time, Rome had issues with feeding itself, and there were long famines in way before this time. But Rome was a hungry city for a long time. From I don't remember what the date was, but pretty much through the entire late Republican era and its Empire era, Rome was completely dependent on importing food. There was never enough food to go around. In Italy, they were heavily dependent on shipping in food from Africa. And when the Western Roman Empire collapsed, the main reason why the population of Rome decreased as fast was because there was no food to go around, because the supply lines from Africa basically collapsed and people went hungry. So they migrated out of the cities into the countryside and tried to get some food. Now, there's also other ways how you can raise military. It's not only levies, but you can also create legions. Legions are basically what you guess. They're standing armies that you construct and have always raised. You never really lose the option to raise your levies, but during the late era of our republic, we are probably going to switch into legions because, again, we will be able to have them stand up or have them as a standing army all the time. They will not diminish the amount of research we get. I mean, if I disband you now, will we see it immediately? I think we shall, but let's try that. We don't, but okay. We will, not lose research, and we will not risk losing population in war, because the levies are dependent on your manpower, actually. So that is beneficial. However, that's a very late game decision for us, because, again, they consume an inordinate amount of money to create. You need special laws passed. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. And they are actually pretty well, they're extremely expensive. They have a lot of benefits, but sticking with your levies for quite some time is a very good strategy, and it's a historic one, so I'm going to stick to that. There's also another type of units that you can get, and those are mercenaries. This is, for example, the modus operandi for Carthage. They pretty much had no standing army, but they used almost entirely mercenary armies, and we're gonna do that quite a lot too. They are expensive. If you want to recruit any mercenary army, it costs you flat 100 gold, and then you pay them a monthly maintenance based on their total strength. Interestingly, you do not pay them based on the martial of the leader, and that's where my biggest goal is. Basically, if I was to raise an army, I would much rather get this one, or raise a mercenary army. I would much rather take this one under the command of Marsamini, who has martial 14. He's just 16 years old. Jesus Christ, this guy is amazing. I mean, he has 0 finesse and 0 charisma and very low zeal, but he has martial 14. So if we... man, he's in... Alright, he's in Etruria and Corsica. Well, that kind of sucks, but if we got him and were able to sail him into our territory, he would greatly benefit our armies, because I could just pool my armies together and put this guy in command, and with 14 martial, he would give us massive bonuses to every battle we'll fight. So that's how you can use them. There are some pretty massive armies that you can see here. I don't think we might see them at this point. Yeah, there's the biggest one I can see here is 13k, but they grow as the game progresses. So you get to 20k, 30k, very soon you will see very large armies. These characters also die and different ones take over, so it is as well very dynamic. And last but not least, there are navies. Navies, we have 2 right now. We have them the same size, each have 6 ships. You have the Burnians and Triremes here, but you can build more ships, more ship types based on the size of your port. There are Tetriers here, Hexiers, Octiers, and Mega Polareme. If I'm not mistaken, I don't know that much about ships in antiquity, but I believe the number here, Hexier meaning 6, or Octier meaning 8, that's about how many lines of rows there were, because these are all rowing ships. There wasn't not that much known about sailing at this point. They cost more and more money, of course, to build, but they're much stronger. It's kind of interesting system where the Burnian gets a bonus against itself, but against any bigger ship it gets massive penalties. And as you go down, these ships get more and more bonuses, with the Mega Polareme getting massive bonuses against every single other type of ship, but it costs the most. So, it's kind of interesting to see how that works in battle. Alright, so we have explained the military, we have explained the navies. Again, for navies you also put in characters, and I think that we can now move to starting the explanation, or to start the explanation about characters. Alright, so we went through the population and we went through the military. Now let's move to the characters. I'm gonna use my consoles to demonstrate and speak a little bit about them, because they're the most prominent characters that will shape our situation. So I'm gonna be honest, I don't like republics that much. I prefer kingdoms, because there you have a sort of a Crusader King type game ahead of you, because each of the characters have a various amount of statistics. You have a ton of interactions that you can choose, but consuls are elected, I think, for us every 4 years, every 5 years. Okay, because we're an aristocratic republic, that's actually very ahistorical, because at this time I think the length of term was 1 year. But I guess, I mean, we can pass some laws to actually lower that, but either way, each of the characters that you will get will have a number of statistics. Publius Sempronius Sophus is our consul. He's of this would be a Sempronius family, actually. I'm not entirely sure. He has a culture, he has a religion, so he's a Roman and he is Italic. He has a loyalty. Your main character is always your consul. He has full loyalty. There's never going to be less than that. He has statesmanship, which actually defines how well he's going to perform in his role. He's getting a bonus every month. So it is good to employ some of the characters in many roles, because the higher their statesmanship, the better they will perform. If you actually make them lose their office, again, the statesmanship is going to start decrease and decay. So, you know, it's as deep as you want to go, basically. There's popularity. The higher the popularity, the better modifiers the character gets. There's corruption, which is the most horrifying thing that can actually come to you. The corruption, highly corrupt characters cause a lot of unrest. They have a higher chance of losing loyalty and turning against you, and basically they will screw you over big time, whether it's your economy, but it's the civil war that they're gonna eventually start. It's just not good to have corrupt characters anywhere near you. They have martial, finesse, charisma, and zeal. These come into play at various moments, because let me jump a little bit ahead. There is a number of offices that your characters can hold. There is, for example, the office of Tribunus Militum, which gives you extra month of military experience based on the statesmanship and on his maximum martial. This guy is amazing. He has 12 martial, but he has only 51 statesmanship, so he's giving us only 51%. Again, this is a great mechanic that actually makes you reconsider whether you want to get someone appointed instead. For example, if we have a bad character, yeah, Perfectus Militaris here, this guy has only 6 martial, but let's say he is already a very good statesman, so he is giving us a full bonus. And if we would appoint someone else who has very bad statesmanship, like this guy, he has martial 9, so a potential much better overall outcome, but right now he would be giving us much less. I mean, not in this case, because this guy has terrible martial and also terrible statesmanship, so he's not very good, but you get the point. So various positions require various stats. Some need zeal, some need charisma, some need... Actually, this is charisma, and this is finesse, yes. So, you know, various of these stats come into play in various roles. You also need to keep an eye on the great families. These families, we start with 3, eventually we're gonna get 4. And I'm not entirely sure if we get 5 in the late game. I think we might, but I'm not sure. I think we get just 3. Each one of these great families, we have the Fabi, Claudi, and Corneli, requires a certain amount of positions in Rome. Right now, they all want 3. And if we get the 4th family, which we get when we increase our power and become a regional power, right now we are not a regional power, we'll get the 4th family, so we'll need to make sure that these guys always get their share of power. Now, this is this is a little bit tricky to explain, but you need to balance it out so that everybody is loyal. That's the loyalty thing here. Let me look at the guy that's ruling our... Oh, wait, I need to do it this way. So, Marcus Valerius Corvus here is a great guy, but he has a very low loyalty. There is a number of things that can come to it. If you, for example, your great family doesn't have enough positions, they will be generally disloyal as a whole family, but you need to keep your loyalty high, because when it drops too low, these people will become disloyal. They will stop listening to you, meaning that, for example, if his loyalty would drop below 33, we couldn't build anything in his territory, we couldn't change him, we couldn't reappoint him, and if he raised his army, he would act completely independent. He wouldn't listen to our orders. We couldn't actually issue him any orders. Now, the loyalty is usually very strictly taken down the more the powerful the character is. So Marcus Valerius Corvus here has a power base of 24. 22.46 out of that is actually coming from the governorship size, and 2 from him being governor. It's kind of hard to imagine that maybe right now, but there is a delicate balance that you need to walk. You need very good characters that will take care of your provinces, your offices, and generally Rome as a whole, your armies and whatever. But you don't want them too good in most cases, because when they, for example, if Marcus here would revolt, we would face a guy with martial 10. So you need to think about who you appoint where, because in the beginning it is not that hard. But imagine that we have, say, you know, an empire of this size, so you would have a dozen or 24 governors, each one of them with various powers and corruption and stats, and it can get really hard to keep an eye on everything. Once they start being disloyal, they can get into an open rebellion, and every character that has, they don't even need to be disloyal, but the lower their loyalty, the more likely they are to join the rebellion. So even a fairly loyal character can eventually be swayed to join. So you need to be very careful, and it's also a very important lesson why we are always going to invest into our core territory the most, why we're going to first focus on getting the entire day of Italia, and why we're going to invest into that one the most. I'm going to develop Cisalpine Gaul, I'm going to develop Magna Graecia, I'm going to develop Illyria, but we're always going to develop Italia the most, because the power that our governor gets, and which lowers his loyalty, is actually relative. It's kind of, I don't want to go into too much detail, but when we look at, when we look at our territory as a whole, it will tell us here somewhere. Wait, I'm not entirely. I think I saw it here. Yes, this is the power base of Rome. So you can see that our total power base is 192. And it is, it's going to grow. Each one of the families have their own power base. It shows you who are the most powerful characters. But 24 is going to mean much less when we control half of Europe than it means right now when it's a substantial chunk of our territory. So, you need to be very careful about how you distribute the governorships, what kind of people you put at certain positions. Because, for example, if I wanted to change Marcus here, is he Marcus? Sorry, I forgot. Yes, Marcus. Well, where is Corvus? I know he's Corvus, but... So if I choose someone better, for example, do we have anyone with better martial? We don't. We have you, Lucius Papirius Cursor, who is also a very good character with very high martial. You have finesse of 8, so this guy wouldn't be better. But if we, for example, wanted someone with extremely high finesse, the best one we have is Aulus Verginius here, has finesse of 9, and he has loyalty of 55, so it's pretty good. But the moment we appoint him, he immediately gets a massive malus, because he is no longer having a power base of 0, but he now has a power base of 24, I think, which is going to take his loyalty. So if you are not careful and appoint someone with a low loyalty to start with, this guy has 45, then those 22 would make him immediately disloyal, and we would be in a big trouble. Now again, on the contrary, giving them governorship is a great way how to increase their loyalty, because they will be happy. Oh, you know, it's a game of chicken that you have to play with each one of the characters, and actually creates a pretty interesting area of politics. Again, I prefer kingdoms, because there you have your king versus, or your dynasty versus everyone else. Here, our characters are gonna rotate. You know, we're gonna get new governors every 5 years, consuls and no, not governors, but consuls and proconsuls. So it's gonna be really dicey sometimes, because, you know, if that happens during a war, for example, you may get someone with terrible stats who will immediately, you know, break your army. Or you get lucky and you get someone very good. But you can, you know, kind of look ahead who is the most likely character to be elected here. So you can see this guy will have a martial of 2. Awesome. So we're gonna, instead of 7, which is already not that great, we're gonna get 2. Well, never mind then. But yeah, as I said, Latinum, or, you know, the entire Italy will need to be the strongest, and that must be most developed, so that, you know, the core of our seat will sit here. And eventually, like, Italy as a whole, because, you know, we can pretty much keep an eye on who we appoint into these territories, but the further we get from Rome, the harder it's gonna be to control these characters. And I think, again, as I mentioned, this will not be a big problem in the beginning couple of episodes, but later on when we expand, it's gonna get really, really, really bad. Alright, I think we can now jump to technology, because that is another big topic that we need to discuss. Alright, so we have discussed our population, we have discussed how military works, how our characters come into that, and now we're gonna move to technology, which is a pretty interesting thing, because it is it affects a lot of things. So you have 4 distinctive types of technology. You have martial advances, civic advances, you have oratory advances, and religious advances. Now each one of these have, you know, 3, 2, 2, and 1 tree that you work your way through. You will be extremely hard pressed if it won't be outright impossible to get every advance in every tree. You have to be really selective about what you get. Now every time you level up your technology, you are going to get an advance or innovation that you can put into your technologies. Now there is an interesting thing here. When you get a martial technology leveled up, or martial advance of 3, you get a free innovation, and you can invest it in any of these trees, which I actually kinda don't like. What I'm gonna do as our roleplay is that the martial advances are always gonna go to martial, civic advances will always go to civics, oratory to oratory, and religious to religious. There is one exception though. We're starting with 8, getting 2 from each, and I'm gonna invest these a little bit differently. I'm gonna go with the oratory and give 5 points in here and 3 into martial. The reason for this is that there is a technology or an innovation here which is called gradual economic integration, which unlocks the Grand Theater city building. Now the ones that we are gonna get before that are also extremely well. They increase our diplomatic relations by 2, so we can have more subjects and allies, and they negate aggressive expansion and impact and lower it. So that's also very important, because as we're going to expand we will need to lower it. But the reason why this Grand Theater building is something that I want right off the bat is that it gives integrated culture happiness plus 10% in every place you build it, which is great, but it also gives pop assimilation speed plus 2. Now, you remember that we talked and discussed that characters, or sorry, not characters, but pops assimilate to your own culture. So, for example, right now we have the Italian Etruscan citizen assimilating into being an Italic Roman citizen. And they're advancing every month by 0.89%. And that's based on the fact that citizen assimilating gives you a base of 0.5. We have a Tomb of Romulus here, which gives us 0.15. So you get a base of 0.65. And that's modified by 5% for road network. Capital territory gives us 20% extra. Marketplace gives us 2.5%. And Italic revision gives us 5% extra. Now, if we build the Grand Theater here, we don't have a base of 0.65, but 2.65. So this would quadruple, quintuple, the assimilation would be amazingly faster. Now the downside is that this building is extremely expensive. It costs around 300 gold, so we cannot really afford it everywhere, but we are going to build these everywhere we can afford, because they make the assimilation possible. Now, because we are not going to integrate any other cultures, this is going to be our main way how to increase our population. Now, again, as I mentioned, it happens naturally everywhere. You get various numbers in various provinces. Somewhere it's faster. We get 0.72% here. Here we get 0.45. Here we have 0.4, but we're gonna make sure that we build these in as many places as possible, especially in the newly conquered territories, in the larger places. So, for example, if we conquered like this place, for example, the city of Bovianum, it is 24 out of 52 population, and they're all Sabellian. There's 24 Sabellian pops. If we conquer it, we would get something like, I don't know, 0.5% assimilation, but with the Grand Theater building, we would get something like 3% or 4% every month. So you would get way more population way faster. Again, I'm gonna use the innovations to get this one because it goes well with the roleplay. Again, Romans they were very generous with the Roman citizenship to the client or conquered nations. So I'm using this as a sort of a role-play way how to get it off the bat. I was considering that we could just do it as I usually do, have 2, 2, 2, and 2. But I think for roleplay reasons this is going to be good, and it's going to give us a little bit of a bump in the beginning. We would get it anyway, we would go after it anyway, we would just need to wait a couple of decades to get it. The other 3 points are going to go to martial, because Rome was very martially proficient nation. So we're going to go and get most likely military artisans, then logistic divisions, and probably military sponsors, because it increases the loyalty of generals, which is a pretty good feat. Now you know why, because you don't want generals who have high base power from being a general, deserting you or becoming disloyal, because then you are pretty much screwed. So you understand how that works. Now, one thing that I actually didn't explain is how you get these new advances. So you basically appoint 4 characters, each one for the different technology. So you get one in martial, you get one in civics, you get one in oratory, and one in religious. And based on their respective stat, you get a bonus. Now we're also getting monthly research, which is based on how many nobles and citizens we have. And you have something called efficiency. Efficiency is currently 100%, but max efficiency is 100%. We have 62.13, and it keeps increasing. But 100 is actually not maximum. You can get bonuses. Probably not in here, but I'm pretty sure that maybe civics help with that. There are certain technologies that greatly help with that, though I am never entirely sure. Maybe they're under oratory then? I go for them. Here it is, for example, bookbinding. So they have this symbol, will give us extra 25% research efficiency, meaning we actually get way more research done. Now the technologies get more, they get progressively harder, and if you get ahead of time, you will get a massive penalty, like we're getting here, for example, 40%. But you can offset that by having your best people researching. But again, your characters will get very disloyal if you are not careful. Gaius Crassus here, Gaius Claudius Crassus, has a loyalty of only 41.75, and it's because he has a huge power base, 24.29 penalty. And he's ahead of a family. Okay, he has just 2 from being a researcher, but because he's ahead of the Crassus family, he gets nearly 40. Oh wow. Well, I mean, good for us, I guess. He's pretty good researcher. He's trusting. Alright, well, that's pretty good. He's very popular, has a pretty decent statesmanship, but interestingly, statesmanship don't come into play when it comes to researchers, so they're a great place where you can stick some characters that are very good and very young, or old in other way, and you know that you couldn't build up their statesmanship. So, for example, here we wouldn't care that Lucius Papirius Cursor is 60, and his statesmanship is thus probably not going to get maxed, because he would immediately give us his maximum potential here. So that's something to consider when you are going with these kind of things. I mean, you need to keep this in mind. There is a number of events that actually affect research as well, so it's not a totally simple system. And you need to identify what kind of technologies want to go. But because we're gonna keep or stick to our categories, we are going to make sure that we make a gradual way and have some kind of good flow. It's also one thing that I want to mention is that every advance also gives you a base bonus. So for example, our martial advances right now are giving us morale of armies 0.05 and navies 0.05, but they also increase maintenance cost, which is an offset. Civic advances give you extra population capacity and a monthly food modifier, which is a really important stuff. Oratory gives civilization level bonus, and religious gives omen power. Alright, I think that's all for technology, and now let's look at economy. Alright, so we've covered many different topics. Now let's quickly cover economy. Economy, in my understanding of the game, some may have a different view of this complex topic. Can be split roughly into 3 distinctive chapters: taxes, commerce, and food. Now, everything when it comes to economy is tied to the province and to the population. Now, we've already talked about population quite extensively, so I'm just gonna go through it quickly. Each one of the population of each pop that you have in a city gives you certain things. Now, nobles don't give anything to the economy; they are purely research focused. Citizens are also research focused, and they give manpower, so you don't get anything from them. But freemen actually generate base tax, which is then taxed by you. Tribesmen give you also a little bit of tax, but most tax comes from slaves. So slaves are the ones that actually generate the most tax for you. Now, tax is collected in every province that you own, and it can be enhanced by building tax offices, which gives you extra tax. It's also enhanced by certain innovations, so you can get more tax of your population, and it is the base income of your empire. So right now we're getting 4.09 in taxes every month. The bigger your population, the better your provinces, the more taxes you can collect. It's also, I think, but I'm not entirely sure about that now that I'm thinking about it, dependent on... No, it's not. Alright, I thought that it might have been dependent on the governor, but it is not. Let me just double check that here. I don't think it is. Yes, he's just taking away his wage. Alright, so you get taxes from your population. It is a very simple system. The more pops, meaning more slaves and more freemen, and to some degree even tribesmen you have, the more taxes you collect. Commerce is a little bit more complicated. You trade in various trade goods, which you can import or export from your territory, and for each trade, even export, you get a certain amount of money. So, for example, if I started trading, for example, for more grain here, and started importing it from Tricornencia, we will start gaining more trade income. I don't know, I will have to unpause it, but for each trade deal you do, you get an extra income. So it is a fairly important thing for you to understand that most income will eventually, in the beginning it's taxes, but if you focus a little bit on trade, eventually it's going to be trade that's making you most money. The trade is also important from a different standpoint. I'm gonna now speak about Latinum, which is our capital province. Each of the resources that you import here is giving you certain benefits. So, for example, let's look at grain. If we had imported 1 unit of grain, we're currently importing 4, we would get a local monthly food here of extra 6, meaning we can feed and support more people. But if we have at least 2 of them, we also get a global monthly food modifier of plus 5% everywhere. This bonus doesn't stack. The first one does, so we get more food, but you don't get more global food. But it is important to say that Rome, in our way, will import mostly food because we really need it. Fish, for example, give only 3 food per unit of fish that you import, but they give you national freeman happiness plus 8%, which is really powerful. Livestock increases pop promotion speed. Olives give slave happiness, which is probably the least useless. Slaves don't really matter much. Their happiness isn't of much concern. And vegetables allow you to move your populations more cheaply. You can see that there are other things like citizens, so spices increase citizen happiness in the provinces that you imported to. Precious metals improve also local citizen happiness, but if you have more than that in the capital, that is important. This works only in the capital. You get also national citizen happiness plus 8%. And, the only one that actually stacks is food, so there really is not much reason to import more of the other resources. But you can if you want. Stone, for example, lowers the build cost, which is pretty good as well. So, it's important to do this. In other provinces, it's only reasonable to import 1 unit of each, with the exception of food, where food again stacks. So if you get more food, you will get more monthly growth. Each province actually has a decent or decent. It has its own. No, let me rephrase that. Each individual province, like Rome, Tibur, and so on, contribute certain food production into your overall food pile, which is the province food. Actually, so they're calling this province of Latinum, so this would be, I guess, individual territory. Okay, let's call it like that. So each individual territory provides food which goes into the province. And they also take it from the province. So basically this entire area shares its food, same as these guys share their food. It is dependent on the owner, so we're not sharing anything with Samnium or with Campania. But if we conquered this territory or integrated, we would start sharing it with them. So you need to keep an eye on how good your province food is, because if you don't, your people will starve. Now this isn't every month the same. Depending on the season, you are going to get more or less. So, for example, in December, you basically own eating food. So it fluctuates over the year. You get most in the summer, you get the least in December. There are certain ways how you can influence this. As you saw, technology actually, or the part of the technology helps with food production. There's also things like granaries that you can build, which increase not only the local monthly food modifier, so it means this modifier doesn't increase it across the entire province, but the local monthly food income. But they also give you a huge bonus to food capacity. So we would not have 1100 but 1400 here. If we build one granary, if we build the second one anywhere, by the way, that capacity is shared. So if we build granaries around, we're gonna get more food into the provinces. So trade is really important because it can also be used to feed your people, but it's mostly about strategically importing and exporting things so that you get as much income from trade as possible. Now, unfortunately, I'm not done talking about food yet, so let me just quickly show you something. Wait, where's the trade? Trade goods, yes, here. So you can see that each province has its own trade goods, and they kind of decide what you get in your provinces. Now we have grain here, which is important. That's what we get our base food here from. You can see that we are producing 3 in Norba and 1 in Fregevae. This is because Norba, as a grain producing province, has a building. You have different buildings for settlements, which is called farming settlement, and it actually lowers the amount of slaves we need for a surplus of production. So usually for 10 slaves being in a province, you produce an extra unit of production, extra unit of trade goods, not production. So for example, if we had 10 slaves in Circei, we would produce 2 units of wood, which we could export. However, for food, it is really important to keep this in mind, because you really want your food producing provinces to have as much as possible. Because if we had 15 slaves here, we would produce 3. If we had 20, we would produce 4. And again, it's shared across the provinces. So that is something that you really need to keep in mind. Now here in Fregevae, we don't actually have farming settlement, we have barracks, so it would be a good idea to actually demolish this and build a farming settlement instead, and move like 2 more slave pops in here, which would then give us an additional point of food. Again, the reason why I'm speaking about this is that you don't really want to have your provinces starving. Once your city starts starving, first the population will starve, and then it's gonna really quickly die off. It increases unrest. It immediately lowers the population capacity to minimum. So if, for example, Rome would start starving, we would get to something like 10, meaning people are going to move out or die off completely. And we are really in a world of hurt. Plus, it's usually very hard to get from 0, because you don't get 0 like for 1 month. You actually have a long winter and usually not a great spring. Yeah. A lot of people can die out of hunger really, really, really quickly. Plus, there's the whole thing of actually sharing the food with your army. That's why we have so little in Rome right now, because we raised an army and it took most of the food away. And I don't like that, but when you actually disband them, they keep the food. So, you really need to know that you have a decent surplus. So a big thing for us is going to be importing various food into our capital, and we are probably, I'm not entirely sure, but you can automate the trade in other provinces. I'm not always that big on trading in the provinces, because the game doesn't really give you any information about free trade routes. So what happens is that I usually find out that I haven't been trading up to my capacity. You can always disable it, but the capital territory of Latinum we are going to do manually. Now there's one more thing that I actually want to mention here that is a little bit of a side note, but we're going to keep using that. So just so you know, you can invest your political influence into your provinces and getting various decent bonuses here. Like, for example, you can get an extra import route. By the way, import routes are also affected by buildings. So if you build ports and marketplaces, you get more. It's based on population. The more population you have, the more trade rights you get, and you can also improve it by having investments here, for example, into the business investment. So we would get extra trade route, and you can do it over and over and over. It always costs 80, but the more you do, the second one also costs 20 gold, and it costs 40 gold, and it costs 60 gold, and so on and so on. But the most taxing thing is really the political influence, because you can see we're gaining less than 1 every month, so we have to be really careful about what we do with that one. Alright, last but not least, there's also the economy tab. This one is fairly simple. You can change a couple of things here. You can change the taxes to harsh taxation, which will increase slave output, but it gives us much less research points. Or you can go with lax taxes, which tanks your national tax by 50%, which is something that we really don't want to do right now. Later on we might consider it, because it increases population happiness by 10%. And actually that's important. The higher the population happiness, the higher their production as well. You can see that here, for example, the average output of our freemen is 85.54%, because their happiness is 61.76. So if we increase their happiness, to 100, they would provide us with way more things than they do right now, which is great. Arguably it is great. If we have unrest, it is really bad. So we need to keep that in mind. We can also switch commerce. In the beginning, I'm going to keep it on trading permits, which increase capital import routes, but eventually we're going to switch to either transactional taxation or free trade, which helps with export or import values. We're going to see which one is more beneficial for us. Switching this actually costs nothing. So, right now you can really see that the commerce income isn't that high, but we don't really have any trade routes going. So once we do that, it will be much higher. There's also tributes, which we can get more money or opinion from our tributaries who pay us some money. It's good. We can lower or increase our army maintenance, which doesn't really affect us unless we raise our levies. It changes the happiness, morale, and stuff like that. There's fleet maintenance. I'm gonna almost permanently have it set to decreased pay, which greatly lowers the fleet maintenance. I just must not forget to keep it on default or high during war. Fort maintenance can be lowered as well, because that one automatically switches to paid garrisons. You get massive penalties to everything when you lower the pay. So for example, for Navy we save 50% of money, but if we lose 80% of morale, meaning we are gonna lose our Navy the first combat they enter. If you want to increase it, you pay 50% more, but you get only 5% extra morale. So yeah, forts, same thing. You save 15% of expenditures, but you lose 50% of the size and defense of the garrisons. Yeah, and wages, that's something that I will not touch at all unless I have to, because reduced wages increase monthly corruption by 0.25, and that is something that will, within a couple of years, completely cripple and destroy your empire. The increased wages have a certain allure, but already we're paying 0.74 gold in wages, and if we increase it, it would lower a little bit of corruption, but it would just, look at that. It says plus 50%, but I think it's more like double, So, yeah. There's also, and that is something that I don't use much, but there's emergency taxes here. You can, for example, strong arm your population, and in exchange for stability and loyalty of characters, you get a cash infusion. You can neglect research. You can raise emergency tax, which decreases happiness of population. You can neglect infrastructure or cut military supplies, but those I don't use at all. All right. So next we're gonna look at religion. All right, religion, which is I'd say it's kind of interesting. I like religion in the game, but I cannot shake the feeling that it's something that was supposed to be developed more with further DLCs, and they never really got around to it. I think Invictus does a lot of changes to religion, but still, it feels like one of the things that you could maybe even completely skip in the game and not miss anything. But I like it. So religion is interesting. You have a pantheon, which is giving, or you can have 4 gods in your pantheon, and each one of them gives you a basic bonus and also an omen bonus. So, for example, here we have Diana, we have Mater Matuta, we have Jupiter, and we have Venus. 2 of these are Italic, and 2 of these are Hellenic. I'm going to speak a little bit more on their impact a little bit later. So you can see that Diana gives us a bonus of 3.75% to morale of our armies. We get national commerce income plus 15%. We get a monthly rural popularity gain plus 0.06. And Venus gives us national population growth of 0.04. Now, we could choose any of these every 5 years and go for an omen, which is the second thing that you see here, a little bit grayed out. So if we went for an omen from Diana, we would, for the next 5 years, have an increased global monthly food of 8.76%. If we went with Mater Matuta, we would get an extra 1.4 capital import routes. Jupiter would give us aggressive expansion change of minus 0.04 every month, and Venus would give us national citizen output of 7.01%. Now, this is great, but why these weird numbers, right? 7.01. Where does that come from? Well, that comes from the omen power. Your omen power is based on the modifiers that you get. Augur is one of the offices that we have here. Where is he? Here, Augur. So you can see he's about halfway through his statesmanship, giving us basically 3 out of his 6 potential, and that's an omen power of 9. Now, if we changed it to someone much better, which we really don't have, but you would perform better, you can see that he has 4 now, and we would get 12. So the omen power would increase. Instead of 7%, we would get 7.31%. So this is where the offices, you can see how they impact your omen power. But we also get 50.11% from religious unity. And religious unity means that out of 228 pops that we have, we have 457 pops, of which 228 are not Italic. So meaning that we have 40.89% of people who have different religion, which is most likely Hellenic, but some of them can have various different religions. We can see that, I think, in the general pop overview, at least some of them may be Italic, Hellenic, Hellenic, Italic, Hellenic, Hellenic, Italic. Okay, so we have 7 Israelites, so those are a little bit different and 9 more pops, which we can't see here. But yeah, we get also Israelites, but mostly they're Italic and Hellenic, which is kind of reflected in the religion, because we have 2 Italic and 2 Hellenic gods in our pantheon, giving 8% bonus to happiness to all Italic people and 8% to all Hellenic people, which, in its way is good, but it has certain issues. We are an Italic nation, so as I mentioned, your pops convert also to your religion. And here you can see that this Israelite Hebrew will convert to Italic faith. He's growing or converting at a rate of 2.44%, which is not bad, but you can see that we have 40% malice from Mismagic Pantheon Data Religion. That is because for every god in your pantheon that is not your core religion, so meaning these 2 Hellenic gods, you get a 20% penalty to conversion. So, it's a give or take depending on what you want, and we would do well to actually switch to a complete Italic pantheon. It's actually not that expensive. I could choose someone like by religion. So we could, for example, try to get Nortia here, which gives 4% integrated culture happiness. Not that great. For us, Uso would be maybe even better because it helps with everyone who's not integrated. Or this one, Angitia, pop assimilation speed plus 5%. That is actually a pretty good one. And if we would take the Omen, we would get a bonus to stability. And you can see that you can change them for 15 stability, which is a bummer, but it would help us with the conversion everywhere into Italic religion. But I know that we are most likely going to convert to Hellenic. We will get an event for that. That is as much as I know, and thus it would be unwise to change the gods at this point. Now, there's a couple more things that I would like to mention here. We have a possibility here to do a divine sacrifice for 43.5 political influence, which will give us a boost to our stability growth monthly 0.15, which is great. And there's also invoke devotio, which I'm almost never using, but it greatly helps to lower monthly war exhaustion. So it is like an emergency thing. And there's also something that is very complicated and complex that I don't want to get that much into, but you have certain temples to your gods. So in Rome, we have a temple of Jupiter. And in this temple, we have 2 relics. The third one we could put in if we have a metropolis here. And we have Tomb of Romulus here, which gives us pop assimilation speed plus 0.15. And we have Manaless Stones, which gives us punctuation capacity of 7.5%. We could switch that for different ones if we wanted to. We also have a temple at Lavinium to Diana. And there is a temple to Mater Matuta, but in Picentum, which is outside of our territory. If we conquer Picentum, we could put some of these relics in there and thus gain benefits from it. Like we could get integrated culture happiness or assimilation speed or integrated culture happiness. So you can use these relics in any way you want, and it is important to actually build temples to your gods. But you can see that there is already a temple to Mater Matuta here, which we cannot get. But if I would change, I can see if, for example, Vulcan here doesn't have a temple, so I could potentially build it somewhere if I put this god in my pantheon. So that's how you can actually get a little bit of the bonus. So your populations are not only converting culturally but also religiously. And again, the higher your religious unit is, the higher strength of your omens you get. So it makes sense. As I mentioned before, there's the Grand Theater, which helps with pop assimilation speed, and there's also a Great Temple, which helps with pop conversion speed. to your religion. So it is the same thing that we get for culture, but I consider religion greatly less important than culture. So we're gonna go for the Great Temple eventually, and we're gonna start converting our populations, but primary focus is always going to be on the culture everywhere. Alright, and in the last part of this tutorial episode, we are actually going to look at the government, laws, ledgers, traditions, and other things that didn't fit anywhere else. Alright, let's close this tutorial episode with information about the government. So the government is something that I avoided a little bit. We've just spoken about the characters. We get two consuls. We have a consul and a co-consul, which is historical. What's not historical is that we're actually getting them elected every 5 years. So we should be getting them elected every year. But I understand that in the game's mechanics, I guess this makes a little bit more sense, because a year is not that long of a period, and constantly changing them would probably cause more chaos. We could do it though, we could do it, and we could do it through laws. There is an entire part here which is called laws, where you can actually change the mechanics of your empire. We can do election reform, for example. Here we could get consultum ultimum, which would increase election term duration by 5 years, so they would be elected only once every 10 years. Lex Antonia will lower it by 3 years, so they will be elected every 2 years. And there's also Princeps Civitatis, which election term duration plus 45, meaning we pretty much have them for life, which is kind of interesting choice. You can do military reforms here. We would, for example, need which one? Marian reforms? No. As invention, professional training. Yeah, I think the Punic and the Marian reforms both. Yes. This one allows us to, Punic reforms allow us to raise regions in capital. Marian reforms allow us to raise whatever regions we want. So these ones would allow us to raise regions. Assembly endorsement, these ones give you various bonuses. Maritime laws gives you various bonuses. Religious laws are kind of interesting. They increase omen power, pop conversion speed, or divine sacrifice cost. Integration laws are actually kind of interesting. They can improve demotion. They can improve citizen output or integrated culture happiness. Citizenship laws, they give you slaves, citizens, or freeman ratios, which is kind of interesting. And land reforms give you lowered aggression expansion, pop promotion and migration bonuses, slaves needed for surplus, which is a really good one actually. And Gracchus reforms increase slave output. Now you can see that many of these aren't available to us. They all cost quite a lot, and they give you certain bonuses with Optimates, Boni, and Populares. This leads me to how the Senate works. I mentioned in the beginning that you have a support in the Senate, which is currently 50%. If it went below 50, we would be locked out of many options, and if it goes too low, you pretty much incur tyranny no matter what you do. So you need to cater to your Senate. The Senate has 100 seats, which are split between the three factions. Mentioned them already: Optimates, Boni, and Populares. Each one of them has a certain power in the Senate, and they have a certain opinion of you. So in this case, Populares have 50 opinion of us, but they control only 11% of the Senate. So they're not really that important. Even if we had 0 with them and 0 with Boni, and we had 100 with Optimates who have 58% control, we would have way more than 50% support in the Senate. You don't want to focus on just one of them though, because the balance is going to keep changing all the time, and you can best improve the opinion of these factions in your Senate by making sure that whatever they want is going to be done. So at a certain point in the future, the Populares are going to fire an event which is going to give us an option to get the Centuriate Assembly, which is over here. We currently have a tribal assembly which lowers our corruption, and if we went with the Centuriate, it would actually be a net bonus for us because it gives us a huge bonus to approval from everyone. So we would get 15 extra from Optimates and 10 extra from Boni, and it would lower the Fabricate claim cost by 50% for us. So that's actually pretty good. So if it ever happens, we're gonna take it, and it's probably gonna give us a huge boost. Okay, 10 to Populares. Boni wants us to do an investment into province fortifications, and Optimates wants us to grant holdings to someone. So you can do it on your own, or they will give you an event, and when you cater to these, you will get bonuses. There is a number of events that actually can fire at any time, which can influence the relations, which can influence the setup of the Senate. And you can also directly try to sort of corrupt the factions. So for example, for Populares, we can do grant public land, which greatly lowers noble happiness. It makes Optimates and Boni mad, but it gives us then approval from Optimates, and we get a bonus for monthly relations. These actually tick up and down. Right now it ticks up for Populares, and for Optimates, Boni don't have any movement. So yeah, there is a number of things that you can do with these guys if you want to. Okay, moving on. Senate is going to be something that we're going to be dealing with quite a lot, but I want to show you the traditions. That is something that I didn't explain in the military part, because I wanted to sort of I wanted you to understand the mechanics that I'm going to speak about right now. So you know that we're gaining military experience. We would get that from battles as well. And if we gain enough, we can take a tradition. We have access to Roman or Italic tribe traditions, which each opens up a number of traditions that you can get. If we integrated any culture that we would want to, Etruscans would probably give us the Italic, but for example, if we conquer Greece and we integrate Greek people as an integrated culture, we would gain access to the Greek, well, either Greek polis or Greek kingdom traditions, and we could use them. Now, let's look at the Romans, for example. If we had 120 military experience, we could choose between siege ability plus 10% or between heavy infantry offense plus 15%. It also then unlocks other things that you can go through. So it is pretty good. When you get these, you can greatly enhance your armies. Italics are also available for us, and they're not bad. I think we're gonna either alternate or focus on the Roman traditions purely, because that one is really good. So that is something that you should never neglect, but you need to keep in mind that military experience actually gives you bonuses if you have high military experience, and if you invest it into traditions, you lose that and you just get these bonuses, but they're very powerful. You know, like 15% offense of heavy infantry is great, especially when you remember that our levies are mostly heavy infantry. So that is very powerful. Now, we explained the laws, we explained the elections, we explained the traditions. Last but not least, I want to speak a little bit about Ledger again, because we've already covered the territories. We can see how they're doing, but there's two things that I haven't mentioned before that we can see here as well. That's province loyalty, which you can see is dropping across the board, which is not great. We have 100% province loyalty right now, but you can see that in some cases it's actually dropping. And province loyalty is another thing that greatly endangers you. We cannot have lower than 100% province loyalty in our capital, but anywhere else the province loyalty can drop. Like here, it's dropping by 0.19. A province can also become disloyal and can revolt. So you need to, that's unfortunately another thing that you need to keep an eye on, not only about the characters, but also about the provinces. We're currently getting negatives from unrest in many of our areas, so that's why the province world is dropping. So that's something that we need to keep an eye on. But there's also, and that's what I wanted to speak about mostly, provincial policies. You have a number to choose from here. You can go with acquisition of wealth, cultural assimilation, bleed them dry, borderlands, encourage trade, many of these. In the beginning, we are going to go with cultural assimilation everywhere, because that gives another 0.1 base assimilation speed to everyone. Later on, we're gonna go with this one, which is called the religious conversion, which gives pop conversion speed +3, which is extremely powerful. So these are the ones, the cultural and religious conversions, which we're gonna go for the most. But there are other things, and this actually brings me to a thing that I hate. But every time you appoint a new governor to your provinces, he actually goes and messes up the policies for your various provinces. So I always have to go and I have to manually change it. And you also, every time you do it, you incur a little bit of tyranny, I think. Actually, it doesn't do it now. It's kind of interesting. I think that might be because we have support in the Senate above 50, but you can gain a lot of tyranny from these. But now that we change this, again, we should see that the conversion is going to be massively improved. Yes, we're getting 2.16 in Rome, and if we get that 2 extra from the Grand Theater, we would be at way above 5% most likely, which is insane because it would convert the pops here as crazy. The ledger also shows us the composition of the population. It shows you how much commerce income you're getting, how many trade routes you can get from where. It shows the religious unity, so it can tell you where it's lowest, and that one might be eventually a good idea to religiously convert. And it shows you the food that you have in your provinces, which is also very important. So we're going to be spending a lot of time on this screen. So let me just quickly check if I have went with everything. Oh, I actually forgot about the missions. There are missions here that you can go with, which are great. They actually give you a lot of goals and bonuses if you finish them. That's something that we will focus on heavily. The characters, we've already talked about them. There is a ton of characters right now. It's only going to get much harder. We spoke about the families, technology, diplomacy. We know about that. Mercenary, military, trade overview. That one is pretty good. You know, gives you an overview of the trade, cultures, religion, economy, government, and national overview. So the last but not least thing that I'm gonna just mention, and we're gonna start with that in the next episode, is the traditions, or the ideas actually, they're not traditions. You have access to various ideas here, and they're based on your advances. So for example, if we had 8 advances, we could get elite soldiery, which would increase discipline of our units by 5%. But right now we have access to only a couple of them. And if you choose the correct, because right now we have 3 ideas, and we need to put 2 military and 1 oratory. We don't have to. We can choose, for example, 3 civic ideas if we wanted to. But if we keep them as the game is suggesting, we will get a bonus that's low down here. So loyalty of characters +5 and national freeman happiness +8, which is very powerful. So it's a good idea to keep those as the game is suggesting, even though some of these are really good. Like this one, build cost and build time lowered, is just amazing, and I wish I could get that one. But the loyalty of the characters and the freeman happiness is a bit more important, and I also like to play this for roleplay reasons as the game suggests. So we're gonna choose these as they are. Alright, and on that note, I think we're actually done here. The episode is just shy of 2 hours, which is great. I've been sitting here talking to myself for 2 hours, but I really hope this is going to be a sort of a tutorial for you guys as well, because this game is amazing. It was completely abandoned by Paradox, but the Invictus mod team is doing a great job with it. There's a lot of submods, a lot of things, and the game deserves love. It unfortunately didn't receive any from Paradox anymore because the sales weren't that great. But if you like and you will like this Let's Play, I hope you will buy it and play it because it's just great. There's a lot of things that I haven't touched: diplomacy, warfare, colonization, influence, politics, and stuff like that. But we'll go through that when we're actually playing the game, because we'll have various options there to go through. But yeah, I hope you found this informative. Those of you that didn't know the game, as I heard many times, this game is an interesting cross of Crusader Kings, Europa Universalis 4, and Hearts of Iron. It has great logistics. It has great, population system, provincial system. I really love it. So I hope you will enjoy this playthrough. Join me for it, and I'll see you in the next episode where we are going to start the Roman adventure. So till then, you guys take care, and I'll see you for the glory of Rome in the next episode.